Hello everybody and welcome to a new episode of our program. So here we are once again for another episode of English, and on this episode we'll be talking about a very interesting topic. Actually, it's the art of writing, and not just any writing, it's the art of writing fiction. Okay, so let's have this episode, and let me begin by introducing my guest, Professor or Dr. Reham Adli. She's a writer, and she writes short stories, and she's on her way of becoming a novelist. Hello, Dr. Reham, and welcome to the program.
Hello.
Actually, I want you to teach us through this episode how to write fiction, and of course there are so many rules involved here. But we can just give our audience a very simple introduction to writing fiction.
Well, first of all, before we get into an introduction of writing fiction, you have to determine the type of fiction that you want to write in terms of word count. If whether or not you want to write something that is small and compact, like flash fiction, microfiction,
Flash fiction.
Yes.
Yeah.
Or something like a short story, or something that's a little bit longer, like the novel, the novelette, or the novella, or something that is the traditional novel. So you really have to start on which one of those you want to write in.
But are there steps when people start writing? Are there steps? I mean, can a person all of a sudden, once they start writing novels?
Well, anyone can start writing anything, but the thing is it written well? Does it follow the guidelines or the rules or the things that have to be done when you're writing? That is the thing. I remember I started writing my very first novel. I wouldn't call it a novel, it would be a novella, when I was about 14 years old. But of course the work is very laughable now, because it's the work of an amateur. It's the work of someone who did not really know how things went or the rules or how things
You
are
cannot
done.
edit it right now?
No, it's something written by a 14-year-old. It's not something that could be presentable enough. So yes, you could sit down and write anything you want, but if you want to publish it, if you want to get it out there to the world, that's a completely different matter.
You know a writer called Anne Frank?
Yes, of course.
She died very, very young. She was 16 when she died.
Yes.
And she wrote something like a work of fiction that could
She
be
wrote,
labeled as a
Yes.
novel.
Well, there is always, we've got Sylvia Plath, for example, and she's had a novel published right after her death. Well, sometimes becoming a celebrity is tied to the drama that happens in one's life, and Frank wrote a series of letters, and it depicted the era that she lived in, and it depicted the tragedy that she lived in very much, and it did touch people, and she did write from the point of view of a child at the same time. So the art of writing in the past has progressed immensely, and what could pass as printable or as publishable 10 years ago cannot be labeled so right now. Things are so different.
But what I mean is that writing as a talent has nothing to do with age, because some writers wrote their masterpieces at a very young age.
Yes, of course, it doesn't have anything to do with age, but it has to do with understanding the craft, practicing, knowing how to do it. That's the difference.
Yeah, great. So, when writing a short story, what rules should we follow?
Well, I'm not going to make it that difficult and tell you that you have to follow rules, but there are certain elements that you have to be very well acquainted with. Those elements have to be very well fulfilled in your work in order for it to have the traditional form of a short story or the traditional form of a novel. You could do without one or two of those, of course. We have something called plot-driven stories that completely depend on plot. We have things that are character-driven stories, which are completely depending on character. So you have to be acquainted with the elements of fiction, the basic ones. Of course, there's endless elements in writing, but you have to be very well acquainted with the elements of fiction when you get to start writing anything.
Yeah. Let's talk more about that, but now we'll stop for a break and we'll be watching a scene from the story of Jane Eyre. We'll be back. Stay with me.
Arises from incident.
So what we've just seen was a scene from the movie Jane Eyre, written by Charlotte Bronte, that great English writer. I guess she made a difference in our life, Charlotte Bronte.
Well, all women writers have made a great difference in our lives.
Yeah, you're prejudiced or you're biased, I guess.
Well, no, I'm not biased. I'm saying the truth. It's just naming the facts. That's all.
Yeah. So you think women writers have made a lot of difference
Yes,
in the world?
because topics that female writers have endorsed in their writings are things that possibly, normally, male writers might not have focused on. So yes.
You read this story, Jane Eyre?
Yes, I read it while growing up, and it did influence it did influence me in some way, and it did get me interested into the fine art of writing.
Yeah, but let me ask you this question. You as a writer, or as a person in general, what do you prefer? You have the work of art in the form of a book and another in the form of a movie, or the same work of art in the form of a movie. So the book or the movie, which do you prefer?
Well, I think that if you ask that question to anyone, they will always tell you that the book is much better. Well, you have more time in a book. You have more liberties in a book, and definitely much more scenes, much more introspect on the characters. You don't have that liberty, or you don't have that luxury in a movie. The movie is a total what, 2 hours. The book.
Yeah, but others might think that you don't have the luxury of reading the book because it takes so much time. I mean, a movie could be seen in only maximum 2 hours or so.
Yes, but the movie will never really capture the soul or the essence of a book, because, as I said, they don't have the luxury of portraying everything in a book. You might have deleted scenes, you might have dialogue that's rewritten, you might actually have this entire story tampered with, coming out completely different. And if someone had the opportunity to actually read the script versus the book, you will realize that a great deal of the book has been tampered with the story itself. So if you're after a good story, if you're after some fun time and a good story, perhaps you could go to the movie. But if you're after reading something of a work of art, something that might affect you, something that could transfer you into, take you into another world, an escapism mechanism, maybe, of course, it's the book.
Yeah. Well, actually, I agree with you. For me, I prefer to read the book than watch the movie. And if I have to do so, I would start by reading the book and then I could watch the movie. Because I feel when I read a book, I use my own imagination. I imagine the characters my own way, not the director's way. And usually, when I read the book and then watch the movie, I prefer my own imagination, my own setting, to the director's, point of view.
Well, actually, I do the opposite, really. I watch the movie first.
Really?
And then read, because just like you said, when you read the book, you create this image that is in your head. You give the parameters to the characters based on the descriptions you have. You build their own world and you get inside it. And usually when you see the movie after you've read the book, it's quite a disappointment. You always expect to have that same glamour, the same splendence inside the movie, and you don't have to. I remember having read the Da Vinci Code, and having read Angels and Demons. by Dan Brown and being extremely disappointed once watching the movie. Although the movie is a huge production and blockbuster movie with my favourite actor, which is Tom Hanks. So I believe that watching the movie first is possibly better. The movie is some sort of introduction to the story.
Yeah.
And it implants how the characters look like. It's like when you watch the movie first and then read the novel, you will always imagine Tom Hanks as the main character. So you find out more.
But then again, if the movie you know, was not to your liking, you might not decide to read the book.
Well, no. Actually, I remember watching a movie titled The Danish Girl, and I liked the movie very much. And I decided to read the book. But when I read the book, I was shocked because the book was completely different than the movie, and they've tempered a lot with the characters and they tempered a lot with the scenes. So a good movie does not mean that I'm not going to read the book.
Yeah, okay. But this is really very tough for any writer, because when we watch a movie, there are so many helping effects, you know, that could help a director, you know, show the movie the best way he can. You know, he can attract audiences by so many effects. You know, unlike the writers, a writer has to do greater effort in order to attract their audience, I guess.
Yes, we have a rule in writing that is called show, don't tell. In show, don't tell, we have to use all the tools that we have in order to make the reader feel everything, live the moment, and actually see what's going on rather than being told what's going on. So it is definitely a tougher job for a writer, but I think that it gets through better when you read it than when you actually watch it. You have the liberty of descriptions, detailed descriptions. You have the liberty of going deep into the character. You're reading about every little detail about the character. You can't really have that on screen. The best that you could is how the character looks like in terms of costume and makeup and hair and a little bit of dialogue, but you don't really dive into the character like you have inside a book. So it is a tougher job for the writing than it is for a filmmaker.
Yeah. Some books can be described as unputdownable. You may not put them down unless you finish them. So you get a book, you start reading it, you get so immersed in it that you never leave it until you reach the last page. Has this ever happened to you?
Yes, of course. And most of these books are usually plot-driven books that are action-based. And that's why I always tell people, I tell students, please focus on your hooking sentences. Focus on the hooking paragraphs. You have to hook the reading in. You have to let the reader ask questions. What's going to happen next? Will the hero save the world? You have to make the reader ask questions. What's going to happen next? Use something called cliffhanger, perhaps, and keep the reading going. If your writing tends to become tedious, a little bit boring, too many descriptions perhaps, you will risk losing that bond with the reader. So action-packed, using action verbs, eliminating adverbs, using as little adjectives as possible. Those are all tools to keep the narrative going and flowing. Flow is the most important thing. Like in poetry, if the poem flows really well, you'll be able to understand the poem and like it. If the book flows really well, it's the same concept. So you have to really rely on the type of writing and the narrative of yours to engage the reader. And usually those books that you can't put down are plot-driven books, where the plot of the story reels the reader in and makes them ask questions and want to find answers to those questions up until the very end.
Yeah. So do you have a book in mind that you may describe as unputdownable?
Well, what I might think as unputdownable might not be exactly what you think is unputdownable.
Yeah, of course. But I'm talking about according to you here.
Well, of course, there's, like I said, plot-driven stories. Stories in certain genres like horror, We have, of course, Stephen King. We have James Kunz. We have. Personally, I like Gothic fiction very much. I'm not very much into horror. I'm more into Gothic fiction. I like Kate Moose, and this novel that I've really liked very much, and I was totally immersed in it. The Book Thief by Marcus Zusak.
Yeah,
The different point of views
I
in
love
there.
it. The Book Thief.
And
Yeah. Even the name is funny. The title of the story is funny.
Yes, and the fact that you have death as a character, narrating from the first person point of view, is very, very exciting.
It's very spooky.
Yeah, I could not put it down up until I finished it.
Yeah. Let's stop for another break. And so again, that was a scene from the movie Jane Eyre, written by Charlotte Bronte, the famous English writer. Dr. Reham, they usually say old is gold. So, how far is this true? If we talk about fiction.
Well, the classics have this tender spots in our hearts. We've all been raised on reading the classics, and throughout school, throughout college, for those who have studied literature, of course, and
so you really believe so, that old is gold?
Well, there's things that I've written in classics that might not attract my attention, of course, and some things that, just like this novel, are timeless, things that I would always go back and read again.
You must have read Pride and Prejudice, for example.
Yes, I have, but I have to admit that I didn't like it very much. But I do like the works of one of the Bronte sisters, such as works Jane Eyre, very immersive and very emotional works. So it depends really on what you would like to read.
Yeah, I want to ask you something here. Do you think that really there are books, there are novels, for example, that we must read before we die?
You must. Well, there's plenty right now.
Yeah.
There's lots and lots and lots of books by lots of prolific writers and lots of good writers and lots of emerging writers. Really, in my own personal library, I have over 200 books. And I have other books on my Kindle, and I have other books as PDF documents. So
you've read all those?
No, I haven't, and hopefully that I can read at least half of these before I die. So there's just plenty and plenty of books out there. So what you must read is really completely up to you. I mean, I could have a list of books in certain genres. I prefer writing historical fiction, historical romance. I love those. And perhaps you like works in horror genre, like Stephen King, for example. Others might like chick lit, a comedy or whatever. So I can't really tell you what kind of book.
But you tend to like action, right?
Well, I like to like action-packed narrative, things that are packed with verbs and things.
What about romantic stuff?
I write romance. I write historical romance. So a blending of genres really is the best thing.
You call yourself an avid reader?
I can say so. I can say not like before, of course. The older we get, the busier we become. The less of the time we have for reading. But I try to make up for that by hosting book club discussions. It's like forcing myself to sit down and read, taking classes, online classes, and master classes where you have to discuss a certain novel. I'll study a certain novel to force myself to sit down and read, because like I said, you have to read in order to write. Sometimes when I veer off from writing for a while, I tend to become rusty. I can't sit down and write.
This is what I was gonna ask you actually, because I mean I wanna know, does a writer's imagination ever get dry? For example?
Of course, it's just like I said, writing is a muscle. If you don't run a lot, if you, for example, was a swimmer and you stop swimming, if you're an example of a boxer and you stop boxing, if you stop doing any sort of activity, you become rusty. You stop doing things as good as you used to. So you have to practice all the time. So yes.
Yeah. All right, we've come to the end of our program, so I'd like to thank you very much, Dr. Reham Adli. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
So now we've reached the end of our story on this episode. I hope you've enjoyed it, and we'll be meeting you next week, inshallah. So until then, have a wonderful time.